How much do you think that has to do with like some of the shine has now rubbed off of these, tech unicorns, these big tech companies like, Amazon, Facebook, Uber.
Yeah.
Now Uber, Amazon are like the face of, what everybody doesn't want companies to be, right? These
Mhm.
giant capitalist, resource sucking, non-tax paying corporations, right? So I wonder if how much that has to do with where like now the aspiration piece isn't there as much as before, as
Right.
young people are starting to see like these t-shirt billies, these t-shirt billionaires who run these corporations are no different than the three-piece suit wearing bankers who
Yeah.
came before them, right?
Yeah.
Let's segue that into the talk about fake wokeness, right? These companies fake. Now I'm like so amazed, like bank CEOs are talking about UBI, right? Bank
Right.
CEOs are talking about why they have to behave responsibly, right? And it just
Yeah.
makes me chuckle because it's all talk, like they haven't
It
done
is.
anything.
It
You see
is.
any waiving of mortgage payments, waiving of credit card payments, suspension of any types of loans or debt from banks? It's all just conversation, right? Which I'm sure we've seen that many times
Yep.
from many different companies. How much of it has to do with that, of just the reality that the cultures that we have that reward business success and financial success create the types of individuals and types of companies that all fall into this category of capitalist predatory capitalism?
It's a really good question. Um, I think frankly we may see a paradigm shift come out of all this, and I think it's been a long way coming. So if you take a look at some of these big tech companies, right? In the early 2000s, all the way even up to the early 2010s, they were just glorified. One of the reasons why was they were so innovative. The second reason why was because they were providing access to information at a scale we've never seen before. And the missions of companies like Google and Facebook were also really well aligned with the missions of the United States administration and the internet at large, which is to connect the world, right? So in a lot of ways, people saw them in a very utopian light. They also attracted a ton of young people. It was sexy, right? Now, as we start to see, we're almost starting to unsheath the beast and see like all the negative externalities. I think Cambridge Analytica was a turning point in that regard. Like I know that once Cambridge Analytica came out for me, I started being like, hold on a second, what is going on with these algorithms here? What kind of data do they have on me? And I remember from there, I started reading more about platforms like Amazon, platforms like Apple, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that one of the early indicators that our generation will see a paradigm shift exists in the polling of the youngest people right now. If you talk to the youngest people, especially in the United States, I don't know the polling data in Canada, but I know the polling data in the United States. The majority of young people in the United States identify as socialists, right? That is that is like contrary to what the mainstream media has been putting out for the last 30 years, where socialism has been tied to communism, where it's anything that's even remotely socialist is kind of shunned. Most young people lean that way. And I think that's a result of two recessions now, and a result of just them not finding the opportunity, them seeing kind of like, hey, this system isn't working for us. So I
I don't know,
think
man, though, but
to,
let me push back on that a little bit here, okay? So if that is true, and you know what, 2 U.S. elections now, I've bought into this narrative that young people, millennials, and Gen Z will embrace socialism like my generation and the generation before it won't, because we connect socialism and identify socialism with the Soviet Union and the Cold
right,
War,
right.
and those kinds of imageries and memories, versus you guys don't. You don't have recollection of that. You see socialism,
No,
you're like, it basically means that we all help each other and we provide safety nets and social security
right.
for each other. What's wrong with that, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
but Ankur, my pushback is you've had now 2 chances to elect Bernie Sanders, probably like the pitcher boy of socialism, and
Right.
you failed in both times. Now the first time I can give young people a pass because there's a lot of other factors that were at play, but this time, I mean, looks what the data shows is you guys didn't show up. You didn't show up for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Well,
I'm still perplexed by that as well. And the reason why I'm perplexed by that is the fact that we see that this is a very, what's the word? It seems to be a very politically engaged generation, and yet that doesn't lead to voting. And I'm wondering if there is a sense of just like, it doesn't matter what we do. Do you know what I mean? At least politically, like at least in terms of electing people, which I don't think is the case for me and a lot of the friends that I talk to, but I'm wondering if that's the case. So in terms of that disconnect, I don't really know if I can explain it because frankly, I'm confused by it too. The one thing I would say though is Bernie Sanders' ideas, even if Bernie Sanders hasn't been elected, his ideas are very much present in the discourse in a way that they weren't 4 years ago, 8 years ago, right?
yeah, but
So
you and I both know, Ankur, that nobody, but considering, who looks like is going to be the nominee, the Democratic nominee, is not going to be able to carry that flag. He's not going to be able to carry Bernie's ideas, right? Because he's an
yeah,
establishment candidate. Right
yeah,
now, it's all well and good, and you'd be a fool to not embrace some sort of socialist programs and socialist policy during the pandemic.
yeah.
I don't know how long that'll last, considering the history of these
Mm-hmm.
of the Democratic Party and their candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But let's leave that aside. I mean, because you've touched on a couple of things I think we need to touch on. Obviously, I think other than the further dissection of voting also goes into race as well, right? And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I mean, and I've said this many times, that one of the issues for young people, one of the barriers, is how we still force people to vote, right? We force them
Mm-hmm.
to take time off work and go to a polling booth and stand in line and vote, right? And we don't allow for online or mail-in ballot, and it looks like they're not going to allow that again this year, even though isolation factors. They're still trying to suppress the mail ability to mail in. So, so I think that's a factor, and that's a legitimate factor. I believe that online voting would greatly increase the participation rate of young people, because you guys, you digital natives come from an era where if I do my research and I like something, I want to buy it right now, and I can
Right.
online, right? So why can't I do the same for my politics? I do my research, if I'm not totally politically engaged, the day of or day before. Or why does there even have to be an election day, man? Like if there's online
Yeah.
voting, you could just vote whenever the window is open,
Like
right?
window.
Right?
Yeah.
Like why can't I just do my research? If I only want to spend a couple of hours on this, like who I want to vote for, why can't I just do my research and then put in my vote and then put it out of my mind?
Right.
Why can't
Right.
I
And
enter
even
into
if
a
there
group
wasn't.
chat? Why can't I enter into a group chat with my buddies from school, and we bounce it around, we chop it up, we make a decision, and we vote, right? Why
Yeah.
do I have to wait and show up at a place again? And why isn't all these voter suppression methods?
Yeah.
Like why isn't voting on a weekday, right? Or sorry,
Yeah.
on a weekend? Why isn't it mandatory to vote, right? All of these
Right.
things that limit and inhibit voter participation, I think, are all barriers for young people.
Yeah, and they're especially barriers for minorities and young people, like you said. And I think, frankly, I think one of the arguments against online voting right now is the fact that there isn't sufficient cybersecurity to ensure election integrity. But frankly, I think if that was a priority for the government and they wanted to see young people out and voting, they would spend the money to ensure that. Like they're not spending the money, so this,
Also, I mean, Ankur, you guys have to call bullshit on that every time someone says
yeah.
it, okay?
So you
Because
gotta you gotta
if
spend
you're
the
a
money.
cyber criminal, are you gonna mess around with online voting? Or are you gonna mess around with transfers of wealth? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anybody who has the money and the means can transfer millions of dollars online,
Hmm.
but I can't vote online. The other thing is
Hmm.
this pandemic shows more than ever what bullshit that is, because we are all applying for benefits online. The government is giving us benefits, allowing us all of our
Thousands of
private
dollars. You're right.
information.
You're
All of our
right.
private information is entered onto these government websites, Encore,
Yeah.
in order for us to
Yeah.
qualify for these
You're right.
these benefits. So don't tell me that a government website can't allow me in
To vote.
secrecy and security to
You're
vote.
right. Yeah.
Pure and utter bullshit and
Yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah. No,
And you guys
that's
have to
actually true.
push back on that, because
That's actually true. Yeah. And I think
you guys have
the
to
other
push
thing that we
back
have
on
to
this,
the
Encore,
other thing
because
we have to push back on though is like you're correct in that regard. Like if we can send thousands of dollars over the internet, we can vote over the internet, frankly. So that's true. I haven't really thought about that. That's